Now back to the show. This is The Law Show on CL 650.
Welcome back to the Law Show here on CIL 650. We're talking immigration law with Gordon Maynard and Rudy Kisher from Maynard, Kisher, Stojkovic, Immigration and Citizenship Lawyers in downtown Vancouver. And on the program today, among many other challenges facing the new government of Canada and the Prime Minister, with the, well, shall we say, rapidly evolving world events complicating their plans. They just got in, for crying out loud. And before they had the swearing-in ceremony, they announced who the cabinet was. They made plans to go to Paris to talk about climate. And before they even got to Paris, all of this other stuff happened. So a monster challenge facing the new government. And the Prime Minister has made a very unequivocal statement about citizenship matters. And this is what I'd like to talk to you two citizenship and immigration lawyers about. Mr. Trudeau has said that, and I quote, "Canadian citizenship isn't a gift to be granted or taken away at the whim of a politician. It's one of the fundamental building blocks of Canada." This in response to the previous Conservative government legislation, which would allow the government to take away citizenship rights for people who are convicted of crimes against Canada. So, Rudy, how does the new government how are they going to deal with someone who would have had their citizenship stripped by the old government?
Well, my guess is you're not going to. I don't know if they're going to continue with the cases. They've got about 5 cases going on, is my understanding, and so they can decide not to proceed and enforce them. But they're going to have to pass legislation because this has already been enacted.
Right.
So they're going to have to pass legislation in the House, sort of changing those sections of Bill C-24 that now allows the Canadian government to strip citizenship of somebody accused of convicted of terrorist acts that have another citizenship or have a right to another citizenship. And I think it's important when you take a look at the election that this is one of the election issues. I remember talking, it was at a Liberal event, and I was talking to a gentleman who was a CEO of a biotech company. To me, seemed like a perfect conservative voter, right? And here he was spending money and donating and being very involved with the Liberal Party. And I said, you see,
what are you doing here?
Yeah, well, how come you're here? I said,
right.
You're a typical guy that I would assume, would be a conservative. And he said, you know what it was? He said it was when they started saying that they were going to strip citizenship from somebody else that has an alternative citizenship if they're convicted of a terrorist act. He goes, I immigrated here when I was 4 years old, right? My kids still have a right to Indian citizenship.
Oh, okay.
He goes, and I talked to a friend of mine, a guy I do business with, and he says, "What are you doing voting Liberal? You should be voting Conservative. You're a businessman." And I turned to him. I say, "Well, what I don't understand is if my kid is convicted of a terrorist act, he gets shipped back to India. But if your kid gets convicted of a terrorist act, he gets to stay in Canada, and that doesn't make any sense to me." And his only response to me, the businessman looked back at him and said, "Well, it's expensive to keep those terrorists in jail." And I said, "Well, it's expensive to keep your son in jail too. So
Sure.
Why shouldn't my son get the same right to stay in the country, and I have my son here if he's convicted of that?" And and he said the remark that came from Harper that stuck in his craw was when he said, we're going to treat them differently from what he called old stock Canadians. He used the term old stock Canadian.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
And that division of sort of, citizenship isn't the final barrier to being part of the Canadian family. There's still a division here between what we call old stock Canadians and recent immigrants that have gotten their citizenship. And I think that was, it mobilized people that typically, because we saw a higher voter turnout,
We sure did.
that may have voted Conservative or may not have voted at all, but they felt that was it was pushing the wedge too far, right? And I think that it's been very clear. We've seen the mandated letter that's come out from the Prime Minister, and one of the issues he said, I think it was almost the third issue on the platform is to repeal the C-24 provision that allows the Canadian government to strip citizenship from people convicted that have been convicted of a terrorist act.
Gordon, any thoughts to add to this whole Bill C-24, the dual citizenship business?
Just 5 or 6.
Okay, fire away, sir.
First of all, the words are important. Okay, it's not just, this law did not just affect people convicted of terrorist acts, and of course it would affect people convicted of terrorist acts.
Right.
But terrorism-related offenses. It didn't just include people who were convicted in Canada. It included people who were convicted in foreign lands under a different system.
Right.
And if you read Mr. Trudeau's, Prime Minister Trudeau's statement, he didn't say that he was against taking citizenship from these people. He said, I'm against taking citizenship at the whim of the minister.
Right.
The concern was the oversight and whether this was the right process. Because the way the process was designed was, except in certain cases, the minister would come forward and say, make representations as to why I shouldn't take away your citizenship.
Thus, Mr. Trudeau's reference to something that can't be taken away, or granted for that matter, at the whim of a politician.
Exactly.
Right.
So it remains to be seen what is going to be revoked in the Act and what it's going to be replaced by.
Okay.
It may be just a question of the oversight. It may be a question of tightening the range of circumstances under which this may occur, or what should be looked at too is the degree of certainty that somebody has another citizenship, all right? Because it isn't just somebody who holds another citizenship, it's that they might have an access to another citizenship, all right? So that's, but Trudeau, in his, Prime Minister Trudeau, in one of his debates, made an overarching complaint about the law, and that was that it created two tiers of citizenship. People whose citizenship couldn't be taken away,
right,
and people whose citizenship could be taken away. And he said that that dilutes the integrity of all Canadian citizenship.
That's right.
That when you're a citizen, you're a citizen. And I don't think he should have just limited it to the whim of the government. I think he should have said that citizenship is there. You don't get it taken away from you. If you're bad, if you do things that we don't agree with, we have systems for that. We have criminal laws, we have other laws. You know, you can be punished for it.
Mm-hmm.
But taking away the citizenship, if it starts with terrorist or terrorist-related acts, maybe it then moves on to criminality. Maybe it then moves on to this or that. You know, they started with this, but they ended with this.
So it wasn't specific enough, Gordon? Is that a part of it too? A person could have the Canadian citizenship revoked if they participated in terrorist or terrorist-related acts?
Yes, it wasn't so exact as saying it had to be this particular offense that you were convicted of.
Right.
All right. And it also included, as I say, foreign convictions. Mm-hmm. So you got to look at a foreign law and say, is this...
Take a look at those cases, right? Fatemi, you know, the journalist that's in Egypt, gets convicted of a terrorist offense in Egypt.
Exactly.
So he's got to sit there and call a lawyer now and be worried about, and when I arrive back in Canada, are they going to try and strip me of my citizenship?
Because he was convicted of a terrorism-related activities in another jurisdiction, which under the Canadian law would be enough to pull the pin, wouldn't it?
That was at the time when the Conservatives were advancing the bill, and they, if you remember, they made a public promise that they wouldn't use this bill against them.
This is Mohamed Fahmy, who's about to go to work at UBC.
Exactly.
That's right.
And then you look at Omar Khadr, who's back here, convicted as a child in a court system, you know, in Guantanamo Bay that has been, you know, ridiculed and criticized. He's also been convicted of a terrorist-related offense, right?
Yep.
And so he's at risk of having his citizenship revoked, right? And I think the Liberals will move on it. I don't know how far they're going to go, but I don't think you're going to see the sort of, to me, the Conservatives were grandstanding on these and making them wedge points to say we're protecting Canada.
And just as a very quick aside before the break, you did mention the niqab, and of course the Liberal government very quickly decided to discontinue their approach to the Supreme Court of Canada to appeal. They're done. It's over. It's gone.
They're going to rest with the federal court case.
Well, I mean, even Elizabeth May recognized it as a fake issue.
But once again, we're the Conservatives. If you look at the election, how they misjudged that, because that niqab issue, basically, you know, if you look, they brought the issue up, hoping to sort of rally support for them. And what happened was Leclerc had to make a decision, came out against it.
Yes.
And his support collapsed in Quebec, which hurt the Conservatives at the end of the day. Had he had a little bit more, support in Quebec, they may not have won the election the way they did. I mean, it may not have made a difference, but at the end of the day, that cost them. That cost the NDP Quebec, right? Was the view that after that issue came out, everybody looked at it and fled.
Which is why the Conservatives brought it up. They wanted to make it a wedge issue between the NDP and themselves in Quebec.
Right.
So.
And it worked there, but
it worked there.
But
it cost them elsewhere.
Well,
that's right.
They ran to the Liberals. They didn't run to the Conservatives, right?
Exactly. This is The Law Show on CIL 650. I'm Sterling Fox. My guests are Gordon Maynard and Rudy Kisher from Maynard, Kisher, Stoicevich, immigration and citizenship lawyers here in Vancouver, with more to come on the program right after this.
There's more of the show still ahead. This is The Law Show on CIL 650.